welcome David Perry. He joins us now live via Skype. He is a partner of the Rudderman Family Foundation, a disability rights journalist, and an associate professor of history at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. Thank you for being here tonight, David.
Thank you so much for having me.
I know that you've seen the video shot by Keith Lamont Scott's wife, the aftermath and moments leading up to his death. What was your first reaction?
Well, every time one of these stories comes over the news, I sort of wait for the disability component to appear. And here we were told right from the beginning that there was a disability aspect, and now we know more. I guess that I see the police crowding him, and I know that he's not going to have a chance to respond. He's not going to be able to respond quickly and comply with their commands. And it's very sad and very troubling, but not, unfortunately, all that unusual.
What do you say to police say, they say he was holding a gun, and police say, we're taught to eliminate the threat. What is your response to that part of this, this whole situation?
Well, until we have more video from the police department itself, it's very hard to assess those claims, and I don't want to get into issues that we just don't have the evidence to react to. What I can say is that from looking at really hundreds of these kinds of incidents across the country, people with all kinds of different disabilities, usually people of color, but not exclusively so, I can say that often police demand that individuals with disabilities behave in a way that they would consider, that the police would consider normal. And that's just not possible. And so it sets up people with disabilities to be in just incredible danger every time they encounter police. And that's where I think we can do a lot better, even if in any given situation, depending on the evidence, it may or may not have been possible to save a life.
Let's talk about traumatic brain injury more in depth, because you could clearly hear Keith Lamont Scott's wife, Rakia, saying he has TBI, which is traumatic brain injury, the result of a pretty severe accident he had. For folks who don't have any idea what TBI is, sort of expound on that, David.
Well, I should say that one of the keys with any disability is to make sure you talk to real experts. There are so many different kinds of disabilities that cross every social class and every race and all around the country. I can tell you that TBI, the brain is a complicated place, and when you injure it, it can cause all kinds of disabilities in sensory processing and memory and self-control and so the way you hear things or see things or understand what's going on, and there's a big difference. And again, we just don't have the information yet to really weigh in, and talking to a neuropsychologist is someone who could tell you a lot more. But I do know that people with TBI frequently may react a little more slowly to verbal commands or may not process them in the way that a police officer expects. So it's not surprising that if you're looking at the video and you're thinking, well, why didn't he just put the gun down? Why didn't he just comply? Why didn't he just obey orders? That's when I think the disability angle really starts to matter, that we can see these events, these horrible videos that are traveling around almost every day these days, and think maybe there's something going on there. Maybe we have to reframe the way we process, the way we consider how people should respond to police. We can't just blame not following orders in a case like this.
Talk about some of the other alarming statistics, David.
Well, I argue, and I have to tell you that the Department of Justice and police departments don't track this. So the best information we have is a third to a half of all people killed by police have disabilities. It's heavily people with mental illness in a mental health crisis. Those do get tracked, and so we tend to have pretty good numbers there. But disability is a natural part of the human condition. There are 56 million people in America who define themselves as disabled, and many millions more who don't define themselves but are. And when you start to look at these cases with disability, when you start to look at these cases involving civilians killed by police, you just find again and again and again that the individual had disabilities. So if it's a third to a half of all cases, these names that we know, these names that have rung out across the nation over the last few years, it's more like 80% turn out to have disabilities. Sometimes the disability is really obvious. So when Daniel Harris, the deaf man, was killed not too far from you, it's fairly obvious that the disability is really important to that story because he was deaf and he wasn't following verbal commands. But someone like Eric Garner, the man killed in New York a few years ago, he had asthma, and the last words he said were, "I can't breathe." So there's a disability story to be told there as well.
Last question, what's the solution here?
Well, a lot of people talk about training, and I have no problem with training. I think it's great if when there's a call that comes into a police department that says someone is in a mental health crisis, that if the police respond at all, as opposed to medical professionals, those police are especially trained in what resources and tactics they can bring to a situation. But I would like to see police in general learn to not take non-compliance on its own as a threat worth escalating. Now, if it's non-compliance plus lots of other threat indicators, including perhaps the presence of a weapon, that may require escalation. But when we look at these cases, we see police again and again respond to non-compliance as if that alone is danger. And what if the person's deaf and that's why he's not listening? What if the person is autistic and that's why they're not looking you in the eye? And especially when it comes to people of color who are disabled, we just see police go very quickly from non-compliance to the quick application of force and even lethal force.
David Perry, one of the partners of the Rudderman Family Foundation and a disability rights journalist, thank you so much for your time tonight and your perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.